Hey guys! So today I wanted to give you 12 of what I think are the best hacks for Procreate for illustrators. I use most of these most of the time and I feel like they definitely help me with my workflow and they also just help me make cooler art. I just want to say if you'd like to support my channel and my art and what I do here, you can do so in several different ways. If you like this video, you could give it a like, you could share, comment. You could also subscribe to me if you want to see more content from me. Other than that, you can of course follow me on my social media channels, which are all going to be linked down below. You could give me a tip on buymeacoffee.com where I will give you a little doodle portrait in return. Anyway, let's get into the 12 useful Procreate hacks that I have for you. Let's first of all start with the most basic ones, which I think most of you might already know. The first one is drawing and holding to create straight geometric lines or shapes. So for example, if I draw a straight line and then hold it for a few seconds, it'll automatically create a more streamlined straight line for me. You could also do this with circles. If you just, for example, draw a really squiggly looking circle and then just press and hold, it'll create a nicer circle for you. You can even do this with semicircles and triangles and squares. So yeah, if you're looking to create more streamlined and straight and geometric lines, this function is really going to help you. The next tip I have for you is either using clipping mask or alpha lock. Clipping mask is when you create a new layer, select it, and then select clipping mask. And what this does, it'll kind of hook on to the layer that's underneath it. So anything that you paint or draw on this new layer is just going to affect whatever parameters are in the bottom layer. So for example, if I have a line work layer and I create a clipping mask and I color in the clipping mask, it's only going to color in the lines. This is good if you want a little bit of leeway to create changes. But you can do this same thing with something called alpha lock. So you just select whatever layer you want to change or color in, and then you select alpha lock. And now when you color in that layer, which is locked, it'll only color in the previous areas you have drawn on or painted. So here, for example, I did a line work layer, I alpha locked it, and then now I'm only coloring in those lines. The next tip I have for you is pressing and holding either with 2 fingers or 3 fingers to undo a long series of marks that you've made or to redo them. So you probably already know that when you tap with 2 fingers, it'll undo whatever you just did. And if you tap with 3 fingers, it'll redo them. But sometimes you want to undo or redo a lot of things and you don't want to keep tapping. So what you can do is you can actually press and hold and it'll very quickly undo all of the marks you've just made. And it also works the other way around. So if you want to quickly redo a bunch of things you've just done, you just press and hold with 3 fingers. Speaking of 3-finger gestures, I feel like a Girl Scout when I do this. Speaking of 3-finger gestures, if you have a layer and you don't like anything that you did there and you want to quickly erase everything, you can simply take your 3 fingers and just make a circle with it and it'll quickly erase everything on that layer. Sometimes when you want to copy paste something, you don't want to duplicate an entire layer but just like a certain selection of that layer. What you can do is first of all you make a selection and then you can just simply take 3 fingers and quickly drag it down, and then you'll have a window pop up and it'll say cut, copy, copy all, paste, cut, paste, copy, paste. And you can just select copy, paste, and then it'll create whatever thing you just selected onto a new layer and you can do whatever you want with that. Speaking of selecting and moving things, something that I found quite annoying is that whenever I would select something really, really small and then want to move it, it would accidentally resize whatever I wanted to move instead of just moving it. But then I found out that you can actually select outside of the selection box and then move whatever you want to move that way. So definitely not as much of a nuisance as I thought this simple task would be. Another thing which I recently found out in regards to selecting and moving things is, let's say you have zoomed in quite a lot into your image and then you select something, but then before you want to resize it, you actually want to zoom out first. So instead of like deselecting and then zooming out and then selecting again, what you can do is you can actually press and hold the cursor button in the top left corner of the screen, and then you can zoom out first and then you can resize whatever you want to resize. So that's pretty neat. The next tip is of course a pretty basic one, but I guess I'll just put it out as a reminder there so you remember and realize how useful it is, because it can save you a ton of time. Is you can, from the color chip in the top right, you can actually drag and drop it to whatever area you want to color and it'll color it in for you automatically. It's a color fill. You could also do this to areas which you have outlined. Let's just say you have a line work layer, and instead of going in and kind of like tediously coloring it in like you would with a coloring book, you just create an outline to the area you want to fill in, and then you drag and drop the color chip into that area and it just automatically fills it in for you. You could do it way nicer than I have here, but yeah, you get the idea. It expedites your process so much. By the way, a mini tip that I want to insert here, which again is kind of like a basic thing which probably most of you know, but I guess I'll just say it. If you want to switch between colors, so between your current color and the last color you use, you can just press and hold the color chip and it'll change back to the previous color. Speaking of coloring, this is something I don't use a lot myself, but I mentioned it in my Procreate versus Fresco video, and one of my friends said, well, I didn't know this and it really helped me with one of my projects, so thank you. So I'm just going to mention it here. When you create a layer above a line work layer and then you select the line work layer and click on reference, basically what it does is this acts as the reference, literally, for all the other layers that will follow. So what you can do in your newer layers, you can select any color you want, and then you can just drag and drop within the lines that you created in the previous layer, and it'll just color it in for you. Now, given your lines have to be closed, as you can see, it's not really working out here at the moment, but yeah, when you have a closed network of lines and you use it as your reference, it actually works quite well. And again, this can be something that you can use to just make your workflow much more efficient. Something which I recently learned, which now I'm going to be using all the time because I think it's really useful, is let's say you have a brush selected and you want both your eraser and smudge brush to be the same. Instead of like going through the brushes and selecting them, there's a really easy way to do it. You just press and hold either your smudge or your eraser for a second and it'll automatically change it to the same as your brush. So the next one is pretty neat. These kind of softwares, they're not just about how well you can draw and paint. It's also taking full advantage of all the different effects and filters that they have to offer so that you can make really cool images. One of my favorites as of recently has been to use Gaussian blur. So if you go into adjustments in the top left panel of your screen, you'll see that you have different filters here. You have opacity, Gaussian blur, motion blur, all these different types of blurs, and you have sharpen, noise, liquefy, and clone. And what I like to do to give my illustrations kind of like a dreamy, ethereal look is I'll just copy my line work layer, set it on overlay, then go into the adjustments, select Gaussian blur, and then just by sliding you can adjust how much you want to blur it. And it immediately creates this like dreamy look, which I think pairs really well with kind of that faux Kira sparkle effect that I like to add to my illustrations. And then of course you can adjust the opacity of this blur layer. But yeah, definitely check out this adjustments window and play around with the different filters and effects they have. You can really take your illustrations to the next level this way. The next level! Definitely check that out. The next hack that I'm going to mention is, of course, the Animate Assist. Wow, Procreate really just went to the next level with this new function. If you go into Actions and then click on Share, you can now see in the bottom of this window, you can export your images as animated GIFs, PNG, which I didn't know you could animate PNGs, and MP4s. Wow, that's amazing. And when you go into Canvas, you can see that you can turn on something called Animate Assist. So basically what this does is it automatically creates a onion skin layer for you, and if you have frames that are basically a bunch of layers in groups instead of one single layer, it'll automatically read those groups as frames and animate them for you. Traditionally, when you would do simple GIFs or animations with any given software platform, in order to create the next frame, you would first have to create something called an onion skin layer, which is basically just a white fill layer with the opacity lowered so that you could still see the bottom layer and then start creating your new layer. But now with Animate Assist, you don't have to do that. It automatically does that for you, and you can kind of toggle in between all your layers. Whatever frame you need to adjust, you just click on it and then you can go into your layers and it'll automatically select whatever group or layer that is so that you can make your corresponding changes. And like I just mentioned before, if you wanted to tell the software that something represented a frame, it had to be a flattened layer. It couldn't be a group. But what Procreate has done is it's saying, hey, you can still have your frames as groups, so now it's much easier for you to change individual elements, because sometimes you don't want to have something flattened as a layer, you still want to keep those separate elements separate. Alright, and the final tip that I have for you, which is a recent discovery of mine because I am in the process of practicing drawing backgrounds and sceneries, is you can automate perspective grids. You no longer have to draw it by yourself by hand. Whew, I'm not lazy, I swear. If you go into Actions and then turn on Drawing Guide and then go on to Edit Drawing Guide, you can actually select Perspective Grid. You can also change the color and opacity of this perspective grid and the thickness, and you can click anywhere on the canvas and it'll create a horizon line and a vantage point at that point you have selected. You can even turn on assisted drawing if you want your lines to kind of lock with the guide. Although I personally don't do this because I don't want my drawings to look too stiff or mechanical. You can even create multiple vantage points along this horizon line, so you can just go as far as you want with your perspective drawing. Those were the 12 tips I have for you regarding Procreate. Specifically if you're an illustrator and you want to create better art. I hope that it was helpful and that you learned something from this. If you like this video, you can give it a like, maybe share, subscribe. If there's something you feel like I've missed, please feel free to comment down below and we can get the discussion started. Thank you so much for watching.